You people have no right to be here." The voice sliced through the calm lakeside air, sharp and shrill, shattering the peace like glass. Standing in our way was a furious woman, her face flushed with righteous anger, eyes blazing as though she was ready to summon the authorities herself. My wife's friends hadn't even set down their sandals before being driven off like trespassers. The cheerful mood collapsed instantly, replaced by the suffocating weight of every curious gaze fixed on USA as if we'd been caught red-handed doing something forbidden. Would we be forced to pack up in humiliation? Or was this entitled stranger about to discover a truth that would freeze her in her tracks? The battle for our lakeside was only beginning, and what came next would flip the script in the most spectacular way. You're probably watching this and wondering, are Karens really lurking everywhere? But let me rewind a bit. You need the full story to understand how we ended up here. My name is David. 6 months ago, after the hardest year of our lives, my wife Sarah and I moved into this lakeside cabin. Sarah had just finished 8 exhausting months of cancer treatment, and we knew she needed a place to heal both body and spirit. The cabin sat on just over 2 acres of untouched land, including 200 feet of private shoreline that had belonged to the Jenkins family for more than 40 years before we bought it. This was supposed to be Sarah's big day, her first gathering with friends since finishing chemo. Nothing extravagant, just a relaxed picnic by the water with sandwiches, lemonade, kids splashing, and laughter drifting across the lake. For the first time in months, Sarah smiled like her old self. It was perfecta until she arrived. The woman came striding toward us as though she owned the place. Later, we'd learn her name was Margaret Hartwell, early 50s, expensive salon blonde hair, a crisp white tennis outfit, understated jewelry that still whispered money. She radiated authority, the type of presence that expected instant obedience. But in her eyes was something colder, something that felt personal, even calculated. "This lake belongs to the community," she declared, raising her phone to record us. "The Lakeside Homeowners Association prohibits private gatherings without permission. I'm calling the police right now." She angled her camera deliberately toward the children, no doubt hoping to paint us as reckless outsiders disturbing a peaceful neighborhood. Our friends exchanged uneasy glances, already weighing how quickly they could escape the situation. I tried to keep my composure, drawing on years of dealing with difficult clients in my architectural practice. "Ma'am, there must be a misunderstanding. This is private property, our property." But Margaret wasn't listening. She stood there cloaked in self-righteousness, fueled by the certainty that everyone else would yield before her supposed authority. Through it all, Sarah had stayed silent, her piercing blue eyes never leaving Margaret. I noticed her hands trembling slightly, and my heart sank. This was meant to be her celebration, her day to feel alive again and not another fight to endure. The kids were tugging at me, asking why they couldn't swim like we promised. My anger flared at the thought of anyone threatening her peace. Then Sarah did something that stunned every India, including me. She rose slowly from the picnic blanket, brushing off her sundress with deliberate calm. Her voice, soft yet steady, carried easily across the water. "Mama Broken Bar, do you realize this is my private land?" The effect was immediate. Margaret froze mid-sentence, her confident red face draining pale. Her phone slipped slightly in her grip as the weight of her mistake hit her. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across her carefully controlled expression. "That's impossible," she stammered, her commanding tone cracking. "The HOA controls every inch of waterfront here. I know. I'm the preservation chairwoman." But even as she spoke, doubt shadowed her eyes. It was like watching someone realize they'd been bluffing with the wrong deck of cards. I didn't know it then, but this clash by the lake was just the opening round in what would become the most relentless fight of our lives. That night, the fallout began. I sat surrounded by papers, digging through every document tied to the property. The deed was crystal clear, signed by Harold Jenkins himself only 6 months earlier. It spelled out exactly 2.1 acres of land with 200 feet of private shoreline. The taxes were current, the title insurance flawless. Legally, we were untouchable. So why was Margaret so certain of her authority? A quick online search revealed the chilling answer. Margaret Hartwell wasn't just some overzealous neighbor with time to kill. She was the ex-wife of Judge Richard Hartwell, one of the county's most powerful legal figures for over a decade. Even divorced, Those kinds of ties could open doors a broken bar or close them against outsiders like us. The realization sent a cold wave through me. Margaret wasn't just flexing neighborhood politics. She had the influence to make our lives very, very difficult. Near midnight, Sarah found me hunched at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, stress-eating leftover picnic sandwiches. "You're spiraling," she said softly, easing into the chair beside me. "What did you find?" When I told her about the judge, her face went pale. Then, slowly, I saw that old spark of determination in her eyes, the same one that carried her through chemo. "So, she thinks she can intimidate us because of who she used to be married to?" Sarah said, her voice steady now. "Intimidation?" I muttered, scrolling through Margaret's Facebook profile on my laptop. "Take a look at this." Her page was a shrine to community preservation and property values, filled with posts about protecting neighborhood traditions from so-called outsiders. But what really caught my eye were the comments, dozens of them from locals I recognized, all echoing her narrative. Subtle as it was, she'd been laying the groundwork for weeks, painting newcomers like us as a threat to everything the community stood for. By morning, that narrative had grown teeth. Sarah's friend Jessica called us at sunrise, her voice tight with unease. "I'm so sorry to wake you, but you need to see what's happening online," she said. The Lakeside Community Facebook group, which I remembered as little more than a hub for lost dogs and garage sales, had exploded overnight. Margaret had posted a slickly edited video of our confrontation, complete with dramatic captions about outsiders stealing community access. The video was masterfully manipulative. She cut out Sarah's calm explanation about our ownership, instead focusing on the kids' disappointed voices and our friends' uneasy faces. The comments section was vicious. Neighbors, so many we hadn't even met, calling us selfish newcomers trying to wall off the lake. Within half a day, the post had over 200 reactions and was spreading into other local groups. "We have to respond to this," I told Sarah, seething as I scrolled. But she pointed to something I'd overlooked. Davida Broken Barczyk, who runs this group. The description revealed the truth. The group had only been created 3 weeks earlier, and Margaret herself was the main administrator. She hadn't just twisted the story, she'd built the stage to perform it. That afternoon, the online smear campaign crossed into real life. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had been nothing but kind since we moved in, showed up at our door with a casserole and a worried look. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she began carefully, "but folks are saying there's some confusion about the lake property lines." Margaret's been very active in the community groups A Broken Bar, and she seems to know an awful lot about property law. Her words were gentle, but the doubt in her eyes was unmistakable. 3 days later, Margaret escalated again. Somehow, she organized a community meeting with impossible speed. Flyers appeared on doorsteps and online, announcing an emergency preservation meeting to address threats to shared lake access. Attendance was strongly encouraged. That evening, Sarah and I walked into the community center to find the parking lot overflowing. Inside, Margaret had transformed the hall into her stage. A projector flickered with PowerPoint slides on property values, community rights, and safeguarding natural resources. Dressed in a navy blazer, she stood at a podium like a politician campaigning for office. The audience, neighbors, and even unfamiliar faces, nodded along as she spoke. "Private waterfront ownership," Margaret declared, her voice booming, "threatens the very character of this community. When outside investors fence off access that families have enjoyed for generations, everyone loses." The way she said outside investors while locking eyes with us left no doubt who she meant. She was building toward a rallying cry against us when the back door slammed open. The sound silenced the room. My father-in-law, Frank, stood in the doorway, American Legion cap perched proudly, leaning on the walking stick he'd used since knee surgery. At 68, his presence still commanded respect, the kind of authority forged from 3 decades in the army. Slowly, he walked the center aisle, each tap of his stick echoing across the hushed room, until he reached the front and turned to face Margaret. "Ma'am," he said, his voice crisp, carrying like a drill sergeant's order, "before you accuse my family of anything, you'd better have legal documents to back it up." Margaret flushed crimson, caught off guard by the direct challenge, especially from a decorated veteran standing in front of her hand-picked audience. Flustered, She fumbled with her remote until a slide appeared showing what looked like a survey report. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know your name," she said shakily, trying to recover. "But I had documentation from a certified land surveyor showing that this lakefront falls under community easement provisions from the original covenant." Frank's lips curved in a faint smiley, the kind that meant he was about to dismantle her argument, point by point. "Frank Morrison, United States Army, retired," he said firmly, letting the weight of his credentials sink in. "And I'd like to see that surveyor's credentials, the date of the survey, and the exact legal language you're referencing, because my daughter and son-in-law have an official survey from Jenkins and Associates done just 6 months ago that proves full private ownership of that waterfront." The room buzzed with murmurs. Faces turned toward us, curiosity and doubt replacing blind agreement. Margaret's composure cracked for a moment, realizing this wasn't going to be the easy takedown she'd envisioned. She scrambled to another slide, this time displaying a blurry map with muddled boundary lines. "This survey was conducted by Pinnacle Land Services last month," she announced, regaining some of her force. "They're a highly respected firm that's worked extensively in this area." That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent. Something about her evidence didn't add up, and Frank couldn't stand alone. I rose from my seat at the back. The moment I stood, I felt every eye in the community center land on me. "My name is David Thompson," I said, projecting my voice clearly. "I'm an environmental architect with 15 years of experience reviewing land surveys and development plans." That declaration shifted the atmosphere. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a professional with expertise that gave weight to my words. I looked squarely at Margaret. "Miss Hartwell, could you provide the contact details for Pinnacle Land Services? I'd like to confirm their credentials with the state licensing board." The request hit her like a punch. She faltered, stepping back from the podium, her polished Section 8 slipping before she quickly tried to recover. "I don't think it's appropriate to turn this meeting into some kind of interrogation," she said, her tone defensive and weaker than before. "The real issue is protecting community resources from privatization and not drowning in technicalities." But Frank wasn't about to let her off the hook. He moved another step forward, forcing Margaret to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze. His voice was steady but carried the unmistakable steel of a seasoned officer. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "when you accuse people of stealing land, technical details are exactly what matter. Either you have legitimate legal grounds for these claims, or you don't. And if you don't, then what you're running here is nothing but a harassment campaign against my family." The tension thickened, buzzing through the room like electricity. Neighbors shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some looked troubled by the seriousness of the accusations, others were simply uncomfortable with the sharp turn the meeting had taken. That's when Sarah rose from her seat. She walked forward slowly, joining her father at the front. Her voice, soft but clear, carried easily across the hall. "I'd like to speak," she said. Silence fell instantly. Pride swelled in me as I watched her take command without needing to raise her voice or show aggression. "6 months ago," she began, "I finished treatment for breast cancer. My husband and I bought our cabin because we needed a quiet place where I could recover, where we could start living again after the hardest year of our lives. This lake, this land, it's more than property to us. It represents healing and hope. It's where I'm learning to feel strong again." She paused, letting her words sink in. I could see the faces in the crowd softening, the hostility melting into empathy. "I don't understand why anyone would want to strip that away from us," she continued, "especially on the basis of survey reports that can't even be verified. If there's a legitimate legal concern, we'll face it through the proper channels. But rallying neighbors against us through Facebook posts and questionable documents, a broken bar, that's not how you solve a property dispute." Her words landed with force. I saw heads bow slightly, expressions shift to shame. Margaret's support was crumbling in real time. Mrs. Patterson rose quietly and walked to the front, wrapping Sarah in a gentle hug. I couldn't hear the words, but her apology was written all over her face. Others soon followed, moving to offer Sarah comfort and solidarity, leaving Margaret isolated behind her podium. Desperate to regain control, Margaret banged the microphone for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," she urged. "We can't let emotions cloud our judgment. Property law doesn't care about personal struggles. This is about protecting the community's long-term interests, not one family's sentimental story. But her words fell flat. The crowd wasn't buying it anymore. They no longer saw us as greedy outsiders, they saw us as neighbors who had been unfairly targeted. Frank seized the moment to deliver the final blow. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you've made serious accusations based on surveys you can't verify, conducted by firms you won't name, citing easements you can't provide legal language for. In the Army, we had a word for that kind of behavior, and it's not one I'd use in polite company." As the meeting broke up, neighbors came to us, offering apologies and pledging support. Meanwhile, Margaret gathered her presentation materials in a hurry, her hands unsteady. But before she left, I caught sight of her outside in the parking lot, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent, and tensy. She was reporting her defeat to someone who clearly wasn't pleased. I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Her humiliation tonight had only made her more determined to win. The proof came the next morning, when I opened the curtains. My coffee nearly slipped from my hands. Our entire lakefront was sealed off with orange plastic barricades and stern-looking signs. Contaminated Area A, do not enter. A, environmental hazard. A, authorized personnel only. It looked like a crime scene had been staged where our dock used to be. Sarah joined me at the window, still in her robe. Her hands trembled, and not from fear, but from anger. "She actually did it," she whispered, her voice sharp with outrage. "She's trying to convince people our land is dangerous." The signs were slick, professionally printed, convincing enough to fool any passerby. But I knew the truth. There was no contamination, no hazard, just Margaret's desperate attempt to manufacture credibility. The real question was, how had she managed to get all of this set up overnight, and under what supposed authority? I wasted no time calling Emily Carter, the environmental lawyer Mrs. Patterson had recommended after the meeting. Emily had a reputation for standing up to powerful organizations that tried to bulldoze individuals, and she agreed to meet us that afternoon. When she arrived, she wasn't alone, as she brought a professional surveyor and a case that held what looked like a drone. "This is fascinating," Emily said, crouching by the signs with a magnifying glass. "These references to EPA codes, they don't exist, and the company listed on the sign says there's no record of it with the state. Whoever made these assumed no one would check the details, but they made rookie legal mistakes that could land them in serious trouble." She handed me the magnifier so I could see for myself. The fine print betrayed the signs as high-quality counterfeits. Meanwhile, the surveyor was setting up gear that looked like it had come straight from a NASA lab. "We're going to do a complete drone mapping of your property boundaries," he explained, calibrating the sleek machine. "This will give us GPS-verified measurements, cross-checked against satellite data. The result will be a 3D model showing exactly where your property lines are, and how these barriers line up with them." The drone rose into the air with a sharp mechanical hum, and for the first time in days I felt like we were finally armed with the right tools for this battle. While the surveyor handled the mapping, Emily was on the phone uncovering the extent of Margaret's scheme. "Your neighbor's been busy," Emily said, scrolling through her tablet. "She's filed complaints with the county environmental office, the health department, and even the water board. Each one claims your property poses a contamination risk to the lake. The kicker? Every single report cites the same bogus EPA regulations as those signs." Sarah's eyes widened. "But we haven't built anything," she insisted. "All we've done is plant flowers and fix a loose dock board." "That's the trick," Emily explained, jotting down more notes. "She isn't saying you caused damage, she's saying you might, and that the risk alone justifies intervention. Proving you haven't harmed something is much harder than proving you did." Just then, the surveyor waved us over to his laptop. "You'll want to see this." The screen displayed a detailed satellite map with precise GPS measurements. "According to the official records, you actually own 50 more feet of lakefront than you realized. Legally, you have rights to 250 feet of shoreline, not the 200 you thought." The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Not only did Margaret's claims look even more absurd, but part of the shoreline the community had been casually using for years was technically ours. That truth could either strengthen our defense or complicate things with our neighbors. Emily, however, was already strategizing. We document this immediately and release the facts ourselves before Margaret twists it. I'm calling Jake Morrison, a local influencer who specializes in exposing fake claims. If Margaret wants a public fight, we'll meet her on that field." Jake arrived later that day, buzzing with caffeine and passion. With professional gear in hand, he began recording the counterfeit warning signs, walking his viewers through how the supposed EPA codes were fabricated. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation my audience loves to dismantle," he grinned. "By tomorrow, this video will reach more people than Margaret's Facebook group ever will." But Margaret had anticipated pushback. Just as Jake wrapped filming, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into our driveway, lights flashing. Officer Thompson stepped out holding an official-looking document. "Sorry to bother you folks," he said, clearly uncomfortable, "but I've received a trespassing complaint. Until this is cleared up, I need you to stay away from the lakefront." Sarah paled, and anger surged through me. "Officer, this is our property," I said firmly. "We have the deed and survey to prove it. The woman behind this complaint has been targeting us for days with false claims." Jake's camera caught every word. Officer Thompson shifted uneasily. "I understand, Mr. Thompson, but I have to follow procedure. The complaint came from the Lakeside Homeowners Association, and it includes documentation suggesting they control waterfront access." He opened a folder stuffed with papers that looked official at first glance. I was starting to see Margaret's tactic clearly: bury everyone in fabricated paperwork until they couldn't tell real authority from fake. Then another vehicle pulled into the driveway, this one unmarked. Sheriff Roberts stepped out, his face grim. "Years ago, I designed an addition to his home free of charge when he couldn't afford an architect," and recognition flickered in his eyes. "Officer Thompson," Roberts sparked with the kind of authority that silenced a room, "step back. I'll handle this." The younger officer froze, clutching his folder like a shield as the sheriff closed the distance. "Explain to me," Roberts said slowly, "why you're threatening a homeowner on his own land with complaints filed by someone who has zero legal standing." "Sir," Thompson stammered, lifting the folder, "I was responding to documentation from the Homeowners Association. It alleges trespassing a broken bar." Sheriff Roberts flipped through the thick folder Officer Thompson had handed him, his face hardening with every page. Jake Morrison's camera stayed fixed on the scene, capturing every second as though he knew this would be his biggest scoop yet. Finally, Roberts closed the folder with a snap. "These papers are fraudulent," he declared, his voice carrying enough weight to leave no room for doubt. "The Lakeside Homeowners Association that supposedly issued these complaints was legally dissolved 5 years ago. What I see here are forged signatures and fabricated legal documents designed to harass the Thompson family." He pointed toward the bogus contamination signs posted around the lake. "And those warnings cite non-existent EPA regulations and claim jurisdiction that no state agency holds over private land." Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. Anger quickly took its place as I realized the scope of Margaret's scheme. She wasn't just being obsessive about community concerns. She had orchestrated a calculated fraud, complete with forged paperwork, fake government complaints, and fabricated environmental claims. But why would anyone go so far to torment neighbors they barely knew? Roberts answered before I could ask. "For the past 3 days, I've been investigating Mrs. Hardwell's activities after receiving multiple complaints about her harassment at meetings and online," he explained, pulling out his own case file. "We uncovered that she's been in negotiations with Aquafun Entertainment Corporation for months, working on a plan to turn this lakefront into a commercial water park and entertainment hub." The words landed like a physical strike. Sarah swayed, and I had to steady her as the truth sank in. This fight was never about protecting the environment or preserving community space. It was about profit. Margaret wanted to push out private landowners so Aquafun could build, and in return, she stood to make a fortune. According to the preliminary contracts obtained through court order, Roberts went on, his voice grim, Mrs. Hartwell was promised 15% of all revenue generated by Aquafun's facility. Her job was to pressure lakefront families through false claims and community manipulation, forcing sales at far below market value. Jake scribbled furiously while still recording, realizing this was bigger than any neighborhood drama. "Sheriff, how many other families have been caught in this scheme?" he asked. Robert's answer was even worse than I'd imagined. "So far, we've identified 12 other households targeted with similar harassment and forged legal filings. The Thompsons just happened to be the ones who pushed back hard enough to bring everything into the open." Emily Carter, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke. "Sheriff, this qualifies as conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of official records, false reports to government agencies, and potentially extortion, especially if threats were involved. And if any of this crossed state lines or involved misuse of federal agencies' names, we're talking about federal charges." Her tone was sharp with professional outrage. Sarah, however, cut in with a voice stronger than I'd heard since before her treatment. "What I don't understand," she said firmly, "is how Margaret thought she could get away with this. Didn't she expect someone to eventually uncover the lies?" Robert's stern demeanor softened slightly as he looked at her. "Most people don't challenge fraudulent authority," he explained. "She assumed fear and intimidation would be enough to make you give up your land. What she didn't count on was your persistence, your family's support, and allies willing to stand with you. That's what unraveled her scheme." Before he could continue, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. 3 people in sharp suits stepped out, led by a middle-aged woman carrying a briefcase that screamed corporate law. Robert's jaw tightened. That would be Aquafund's legal team. They've been scrambling to separate themselves from Hartwell ever since the court forced them to disclose their contracts. The lead attorney approached cautiously. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Patricia Williams, General Counsel for Aquafund Entertainment," she said, offering a business card I ignored. "We are here to notify you that all agreements with Mrs. Hartwell are terminated immediately." Our company had no knowledge of her fraudulent actions or harassment, but Emily wasn't letting them off the hook. "Miss Williams," she cut in coldly, "your company entered into agreements for land you knew was privately owned, based on legal challenges you helped fund. Pretending ignorance of her tactics doesn't erase your responsibility for enabling them." As deputies, lawyers, and Jake's cameras all documented the collapse of Margaret's plot, I realized our quiet fight for peace and recovery had turned into a much larger story, one about corruption, greed, and justice. The only question left was whether the system would truly hold Margaret and her corporate partners accountable, or if her connections would shield them from the consequences of what they'd done to my family and a dozen others like us. Should accountability fall solely on the individuals fabricating these schemes, or do corporations funding them deserve equal consequences? Share your perspective in the comments. I'm eager to hear your take. And don't miss the final chapters, where the true outcome of this conflict will unfold. Just as the Aquafund lawyers were trying to minimize the damage, a new figure entered the scene. A polished silver Mercedes pulled up behind their sedan, and out stepped none other than Judge Richard Hartwell. With his silver hair, tailored suit, and commanding presence, he looked every bit the seasoned county judge. But his stormy expression made it clear he hadn't come to defend Margaret. "Patricia," he said coolly to Aquafund's attorney, his tone laced with authority, "we need to discuss ending any remaining financial ties between your company and my ex-wife." His words carried both judicial weight and a trace of personal humiliation, as though he already grasped how badly Margaret's actions reflected on him. Then, in true dramatic fashion, Margaret arrived. She pulled up in a white BMW, flanked by 2 assistants and a man in a cheap suit posing as legal counsel. With all the arrogance of a general surveying her troops, she strode onto our property as though she still believed she controlled the narrative. "Richard, why are you here?" she snapped, her voice cutting sharply through the crowd. "This is a private property issue and doesn't concern your judicial role." But Richard's response made her falter. His voice carried for every ear, including Jake Morrison's camera. "Margaret, the State Ethics Board contacted me this morning regarding your misuse of my name and old judicial ties to intimidate citizens and submit falsified legal documents. I am here to publicly renounce any connection to your scheme and to make it clear you have no authority tied to this county's courts." That single declaration shattered the last of her manufactured credibility. With her most powerful connection denouncing her in public, Margaret's supposed influence crumbled instantly. Her assistants scrambled with their notebooks, clearly realizing their client's case had just become indefensible. Emily Carter stepped forward, professional and unwavering. "Your Honor, We have compiled extensive evidence via fraudulent filings, forged documents, and a coordinated attempt to exploit homeowners through a fake association. She lifted a thick folder of proof. Civil and criminal charges are being prepared against Mrs. Hartwell, and we wanted you to be fully aware before this becomes part of public record. Judge Hartwell examined the evidence with a grave look, then turned to Emily. Ms. Carter, rest assured, I had no knowledge of these activities. I'll recuse myself from any case involving my former wife to avoid even the appearance of bias. Then, fixing Margaret with a hard stare, he added, you need competent legal counsel. Margaret, this isn't mere harassment anymore. You're staring down federal fraud charges. At that moment, Jake's phone buzzed wildly. His grin gave away the news. This story is blowing up online, he announced. I'm seeing people from multiple states sharing their own harassment experiences, and journalists are already reaching out about corporate-backed land grabs. Margaret's so-called legal team was visibly unraveling. The man in the cheap suit frantically made phone calls while her assistants whispered urgently about whether to cut their losses. Then Sarah, calm and composed, stepped forward. Mrs. Hartwell, there's something you should hear, she said, pulling out her phone. Her voice carried with a quiet strength, honed during her fight with cancer. I've recorded every one of our interactions since you first tried to intimidate us. Every threat, every false claim, every attempt to manipulate our neighbors. I learned during treatment you document everything, and you fight smart. The color drained from Margaret's face as Sarah pressed play. Crystal clear recordings echoed across the yard. Margaret threatening us, boasting about using her legal power to drive us out, attempting to bribe Mrs. Patterson, and even admitting her partnership with developers to pressure lakefront families. Sheriff Roberts stepped forward, resting a hand on the handcuffs at his belt. Margaret Hartwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying government reports, forging legal documents, and attempted extortion. As he read her rights, Margaret's expression twisted from arrogance, to shock, to pure panic. Her so-called legal team quietly retreated, unwilling to go down with her sinking ship. Margaret's so-called legal team quickly distanced themselves as if she were a hazardous spill, abandoning her to face the consequences of her own making. Watching her cuffed in a spotless white tennis outfit while attorneys, officers, and countless phone cameras captured the moment was more satisfying than I ever imagined. Yet what struck me most wasn't just the spectacle of justice, it was the relief in Sarah's eyes. At last, the woman who had tried to rob us of our sanctuary was facing accountability. The sharp snap of those handcuffs sounded like the final chord in a long, hard-fought symphony of justice. As Sheriff Roberts guided Margaret toward his patrol car, her carefully polished image crumbled. Gone was the aura of control and privilege. What remained was a desperate figure who had wagered everything on a scheme doomed from the start. That once pristine tennis outfit, which had earlier screamed wealth and untouchability, now seemed almost pitiful against the stark reality of criminal charges and public disgrace. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was live-streaming every second to an audience that had swelled to over 50,000 viewers. His running commentary turned the scene into a rallying cry. This is what happens when everyday people refuse to bow to fake authority, he told his audience, capturing the precise moment Margaret was placed in the back seat of the cruiser. The Thompson family didn't just defend their home, they uncovered a scheme that threatened a dozen more families here. But the story wasn't finished. As the patrol car rolled away, Emily Carter was already pushing forward, her focus razor-sharp. She conferred with Aquafund's legal team, determined to lock in their withdrawal from any future development projects. We'll be filing for a restraining order to block commercial development of this lakefront for at least 5 years, she explained, already thinking ahead. That time will allow us to secure conservation protections so no family ever faces this kind of harassment again. Then Sarah stepped forward, commanding the attention of everyone gathered with the same quiet strength that had carried her through cancer treatments and this battle alike. Her voice rang clear. I want to thank all of you who stood with us, when silence would have been the easier choice. But more importantly, I want us to focus on what comes next. She opened a folder she'd been preparing, announcing the creation of the Lake Conservation Committee with herself as chairwoman. Our mission is to protect this shoreline for families and wildlife, not corporations, and to make sure every property owner here knows their rights and responsibilities. Applause erupted spontaneously, echoing not only the victory but Sarah's transformation from patient to protector, from survivor to community leader. Frank stepped up next, his steady presence as reassuring as always. "I'll be the committee's liaison with law enforcement and veterans groups," he declared. "And we'll make sure anyone who tries to bully families here understands they'll be met with people who know how to fight back." The atmosphere shifted from tension to celebration. Neighbors once divided by Margaret's manipulation now came together in unity. Mrs. Patterson quickly organized a potluck right there by the lake. Families brought dishes, kids played freely in the water Margaret once tried to claim as off-limits, and the contrast with earlier events was breathtaking. The lake shimmered with gold and pink as the sun set, a reminder of why we fell in love with this place in the first place. Jake Morrison, still recording, dubbed it the most satisfying story of community justice I've ever told. His final video was showing the committee's launch and Margaret's abandoned BMW being hauled away. It would later surpass 2 million views, sparking similar grassroots efforts across the state. Judge Hardwell approached as the crowd thinned, his face marked by both embarrassment and genuine respect. "Mrs. Thompson," he said solemnly, "the county will be implementing new safeguards to verify homeowners association claims and environmental complaints." What Margaret did revealed dangerous loopholes in our system. Meanwhile, Emily Carter was already lining up the next move, working with prosecutors to secure charges against Margaret and compensation for the other families she had targeted. "This case will set precedent," she explained. "Using false legal authority to harass homeowners won't just be frowned upon, it will be punished." But the most powerful moment came later, after the crowd had dispersed. Sarah and I sat together on the dock, watching the lake that had been both our refuge and battleground. I took her hand. "Do you realize what you've accomplished?" I asked softly. 6 months ago, you were fighting just to survive. And today, you stood up to corruption and became the leader this community needed." Her smile held a quiet strength I had come to cherish, the look of someone who had turned hardship into hope, and battle into victory. Sarah's smile radiated the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you fought the right battle, the right way. Watching a family of ducks glide peacefully across the lake, she said softly, "When I went through cancer treatment, I learned something important. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's creating something stronger, something better, than anything those who tried to hurt you could ever destroy." As the evening darkened around us and the laughter of neighbors echoed from the newly protected shoreline, I realized Margaret's scheme had done the opposite of what she intended. Instead of taking away our healing space, she had helped create something far more powerful: a unity, protection, and a stronger community than ever before. Have you ever felt powerless against someone who seemed to hold all the authority and influence? Like Sarah and me, many people face bullies who believe their status makes them untouchable. But this story shows that with determination, evidence, and the strength of a community, ordinary people can reveal the truth and defend what matters most. If you enjoyed watching justice unfold and want to hear more stories of everyday people standing up to abuse of power, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Harper Stories. Together, we're building a community where real victories are celebrated, and where those who think they're above the law are proven wrong. Your support allows us to keep sharing inspiring stories of courage overcoming corruption. And congratulations on making it all the way to the end without suffering too much emotional damage. This is Harper Stories. Our team's already been sued 3 times just for existing, and we'll be back soon with more HOA drama than you ever thought possible.